The plastic turkey centerpiece mocked me from across the cramped card table as 6-year-old Madison spilled cranberry sauce on my cream silk blouse. Around me, children's voices competed in a symphony of chaos while the adults laughed and clinked wine glasses at the mahogany dining table 15 feet away. My mother-in-law, Patricia's voice, carried clearly across the room as she told her sister how wonderful it was to have such good help with the children this year. Help. That's what I'd become after 3 years of marriage to her son, David. Not family, not a daughter-in-law worthy of respect, but convenient childcare disguised as a seating arrangement. Emma, could you make sure little Tyler doesn't get cranberry sauce on his good shirt? Patricia called out without even looking in my direction. You're so good with the children. I forced a smile and wiped Tyler's face, the same way I'd forced smiles through countless family gatherings where I was gradually demoted from guest to servant to afterthought. But today would be different. Today, I had something in my purse that would change everything, though I hadn't planned to use it quite like this. Before we dive into how I turned their Thanksgiving table hierarchy upside down, I want to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. Sometimes the most powerful moments come when we finally stop accepting treatment we don't deserve. If you've ever felt invisible at your own family gatherings, this story might resonate with you. Before we witness Emma's journey from family doormat to dinner table destroyer, hit subscribe to join our community of readers who appreciate stories of quiet strength and unexpected revelations. Now, let's step behind the scenes of a marriage built on financial secrets and false gratitude. My name is Emma Chen Morrison, and 3 years ago, I was just Emma Chen, a senior software engineer at TechFlow Solutions in Seattle. I'd built my career on problem solving, creating elegant solutions for complex systems, and making 6 figures while most of my peers were still figuring out their career paths. My expertise in financial software had made me invaluable to Fortune 500 companies, but it also gave me something most people my age didn't have: serious money in the bank. I met David Morrison at a charity tech conference where I was speaking about using AI to streamline nonprofit financial management. He was there representing his family's foundation, looking polished in that effortless way of people who'd never worried about student loans or rent payments. Tall, with sandy brown hair, and the kind of easy smile that comes from a lifetime of doors opening at your approach. David had that particular confidence of someone born into Seattle's established elite. Brilliant presentation, he'd said afterward, approaching me at the networking reception. Our foundation could really use someone with your expertise. My mother chairs the board, and she's always complaining about our antiquated systems. One consultation led to another, and soon I was regularly visiting the Morrison estate in Bellevue to work on their foundation's database. The Morrisons were Seattle royalty, with old money that traced back to timber and shipping. They had that particular brand of wealth that whispered rather than shouted, evident in the understated quality of everything they owned and the ease with which they navigated their privileged world. David pursued me with the same methodical approach he brought to his work as an investment advisor at his father's firm. There were warning signs, of course. The way his mother Patricia looked at me during our first dinner together, her smile never quite reaching her ice blue eyes. The casual comments about my interesting background, delivered with just enough sweetness to mask the poison. The surprise in people's voices when they discovered I was dating a Morrison. "You've certainly done well for yourself, dear," Patricia had said during that first family dinner, her gaze taking in my dress, my jewelry, my presence at their table with barely concealed assessment. "Self-made success is so admirable. David's always been drawn to ambitious women." I ignored these signs because I was falling in love with David, or at least with the version of himself he presented to me. He seemed different from his family, more grounded, less concerned with pedigree and social positioning. When he proposed after 10 months of dating, I said yes, despite the nagging feeling that I was entering a world that would always see me as an outsider. The wedding was elegant but small, held at the Morrison family's private club overlooking Lake Washington. I planned much of it myself, unable to trust anyone else with the details that mattered to me. Patricia had opinions about everything. The venue was too modern, the menu too exotic, the guest list missing key society names. I compromised where I could, held firm where it mattered, but I noticed David rarely contradicted his mother directly. He'd nod sympathetically to my concerns later, then make gentle suggestions about keeping the peace. After the wedding, the undermining became more systematic. At family gatherings, my opinions were solicited, then dismissed. My career was treated as a charming hobby rather than a successful profession that actually funded much of our lifestyle. "Emma has such interesting work," Patricia would tell her friends, patting my hand condescendingly. "All those computers and numbers. I simply don't understand it, but it keeps her busy." David never defended me. He'd shrug and tell me later that's just how his mother was, that I shouldn't take it personally. But it was personal, and it got worse as the months passed. The first time I was relegated to the children's table was at David's cousin's wedding reception. "We're short on space at the adult tables," Patricia explained sweetly, "and you're so wonderful with children. Would you mind terribly sitting with the little ones? Just for dinner?" I minded terribly, but I went along with it, telling myself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, family celebrations, gradually I found myself assigned to manage children, while the adults discussed business, politics, and family matters from which I was systematically excluded. The financial troubles started about 8 months into our marriage. I first noticed when David became evasive about household expenses, suggesting we tighten our belts while his parents continued their lavish spending. When I offered to contribute more to our joint account, he became defensive, insisting that a Morrison man provided for his family. It was my background in financial systems that made me notice the discrepancies. Bills arriving later than usual, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, David's increasing stress levels and mysterious phone calls that sent him to another room, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The truth revealed itself gradually, the way financial disasters usually do, first slowly, then all at once. The Morrison fortune, built over generations, was evaporating. Bad investments, leveraged properties, and a series of financial decisions made by David's father Robert had left the family empire teetering on the edge of collapse. I discovered this not through David's confession, but through my own investigation. When our mortgage payment was returned for insufficient funds, I did what any financial analyst would do. I followed the money trail. Bank statements left carelessly on David's desk, investment portfolios accidentally displayed on his laptop screen, conversations overheard through thin walls during family dinners.
The Morrison Investment Group was hemorrhaging money. Properties were mortgaged to the hilt. Lines of credit were maxed out. The family's lifestyle was being maintained through increasingly desperate financial maneuvers, and David was complicit in keeping this secret from me, even as it affected our shared financial future. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. I was working from home when the certified mail delivery interrupted my video conference with a client in Tokyo. David had already left for the office, and I signed for the envelope with our names on it, assuming it was some routine financial document. Inside was a notice of default on the mortgage for the Morrison family estate, the property where Patricia held her charity galas, where David had grown up, where I'd been systematically marginalized for 2 years. It was going to be seized by the bank in 60 days, unless the family could produce $847,000 in back payments and penalties. I stared at the notice for a long time, sitting in our kitchen while my coffee grew cold.
The amount represented nearly everything I had in savings and investments. Money I'd earned through years of 14-hour days, weekend consulting projects, and careful financial planning. Money I'd been setting aside for our future children's college funds, for early retirement, for the kind of security my immigrant parents had sacrificed everything to give me. The rational part of my mind said this wasn't my problem. The Morrison family had made their bed through poor financial decisions and refusal to adapt their lifestyle to reality. They had treated me as an outsider for years, making it clear I would never truly belong to their world. Why should I rescue them from consequences of their own making? But the emotional part of my mind thought about David, about the genuine pain he'd shown during his increasingly frequent brooding silences, about Patricia's brittle facade beginning to crack around the edges, about the foundation's good work that would disappear if the family lost their credibility along with their assets. I made the decision quickly, the way I made all my important choices, with logic, analysis, and a plan for execution. I would pay off the mortgage myself, but quietly, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. It would be my gift to David's family, proof that I was truly committed to being part of their world, regardless of how they treated me. The logistics were surprisingly simple. I liquidated my investment portfolio, transferred funds from my various savings accounts, and worked with my financial advisor to structure the payment in a way that would satisfy the bank's requirements. Within a week, I had cashier's checks totaling $847,000 ready to deliver. But I didn't tell David what I was doing. Some instinct warned me to keep this secret, to see how the family handled their crisis before revealing my intervention. I wanted to observe their true character when they thought no one was watching, when their carefully constructed social masks might slip. I arranged for the payment to be made through a shell company I created, with instructions that the Morrison family be notified that an anonymous benefactor had satisfied their debt. The paperwork would take time to process, but the foreclosure would be stopped immediately. I was in my home office when David received the call from the bank. I heard his side of the conversation through our shared wall, his voice rising from confusion to disbelief to something approaching hysteria. "What do you mean the mortgage is paid off? By whom? That's impossible. There must be some mistake." When he hung up, I waited for him to come find me, to share this miraculous news with his wife. Instead, I heard him immediately calling his father, his voice dropping to the urgent whisper he used for family financial discussions, from which I was excluded. That evening, David came home with champagne and a bouquet of flowers, but he didn't mention the phone call. Over dinner, he acted as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When I asked about his day, he gave me the same generic responses he'd been offering for months. "Just the usual client meetings," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing too exciting." I waited. Surely he would tell me about the family's financial crisis, about this mysterious windfall, about what it meant for our future. We were married, supposedly partners in all things. This was exactly the kind of news that should be shared between spouses. But David said nothing. Not that night, not the next day, not the following week. The Morrison family had been saved from financial ruin, and my husband was continuing to hide this fact from me, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with adult information. The final insult came 3 weeks later when Patricia called to invite us to a celebration dinner at the family estate. "We have wonderful news to share," she said in her perfectly modulated voice. "The family has overcome some challenges, and we want to celebrate with everyone who matters to us." Everyone who matters. I wondered if I would be included in that category, or relegated to helping serve wine while the adults discussed the mysterious benefactor who had saved their home. The dinner was elegant, held in the Morrisons' formal dining room with their best china and crystal. David's extended family was there, his sister Caroline with her husband James, his uncle Richard and Aunt Susan, various cousins and their spouses. As we gathered in the living room for pre-dinner cocktails, I noticed the subtle signs of relief on everyone's faces. These people had known about the financial crisis, had probably been discussing it in family meetings from which I was carefully excluded. "Before we eat," Robert announced, raising his glass of 30-year-old scotch, "I want to share some news. Our family faced a serious challenge recently, but we've been blessed with an extraordinary gift. An anonymous benefactor has paid off the mortgage on this house, ensuring it remains in the Morrison family for future generations." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and congratulations. I watched faces carefully, noting who seemed genuinely shocked and who was merely performing surprise. Caroline and James appeared to be hearing this for the first time. Uncle Richard nodded knowingly. Patricia clutched her pearl necklace with what looked like genuine relief. And David? David avoided my gaze entirely, focusing his attention on his father's speech as if this was all news to him. "We don't know who our benefactor is," Robert continued, "but we're grateful beyond words. This house represents 5 generations of Morrison family history, and now it's secure for generations to come. More toasts, more congratulations." I raised my glass with everyone else, tasting the irony along with the champagne. My money had saved their legacy, and I was watching them celebrate it without any acknowledgement of my existence as anything more than David's wife. Dinner was served, and I found myself once again assigned to help Patricia serve, while the men discussed investment strategies and the women talked about upcoming charity events. When we finally sat down to eat, I was placed at the far end of the table, between David's teenage nephew and the family friend who'd had too much to drink. Throughout the meal, the conversation repeatedly returned to their mysterious savior. Theories were proposed and debated. Robert suggested it might be a former business partner. Patricia wondered if it could be someone from their charity work. Caroline thought perhaps it was a wealthy client who appreciated David's investment advice. "Whoever it was," Patricia declared, cutting into her beef tenderloin, "they truly understand the importance of preserving family legacy. They must be someone who appreciates what we represent in this community." I almost choked on my wine. The someone was sitting 15 feet away, ignored and invisible while they celebrated her generosity. That night, lying in bed beside my husband who still hadn't mentioned the mortgage payment, I made a decision. I would keep this secret until the moment it could serve a purpose beyond simple generosity. I had learned something valuable about the Morrison family's character, and knowledge, I realized, was a form of power. The opportunity to use that power came sooner than expected. Thanksgiving was always the Morrison family's largest gathering, held at the family estate with all the ceremony Patricia could muster. As the date approached, I received my usual assignment: arrive early to help with food preparation and child supervision. "Emma, dear," Patricia called me the week before, "would you mind bringing that lovely sweet potato casserole you made last year? And perhaps you could handle the children's table again. You're so patient with them, and it frees up the adults to have proper conversation." The children's table. At Thanksgiving dinner in the house I had secretly saved from foreclosure, I would be sitting with 8-year-olds while the adults I'd rescued discussed their good fortune in finding an anonymous benefactor. I agreed, sweetly, as I always did. But this time, I had a plan. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood as I prepared my assigned sweet potato casserole. I dressed carefully in my cream silk blouse and charcoal wool pants, clothes suitable for a grown woman sitting at an adult table. In my purse, I placed a manila envelope containing documents I'd never planned to use as weapons. The deed to the Morrison family estate, now showing my name as the anonymous benefactor who held the mortgage, and copies of all the financial records proving the payment had come from my accounts. David was unusually quiet during the drive to his parents' house, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I wondered if he felt guilty about the secret he was keeping, or if he was simply nervous about maintaining the family fiction during what was sure to be another celebration of their mysterious savior. "Everything okay?" I asked as we pulled into the circular driveway. "Just thinking about work," he replied, the same non-committal response he'd been giving me for months. "You know how it is." I didn't know how it was because he never told me anything real about his work or his family situation. But I nodded sympathetically, playing my assigned role as the understanding wife who didn't need to be burdened with important information. The Morrison estate looked beautiful in the autumn light, the extensive gardens showing Patricia's expensive landscaping even in late November. The house itself stood solid and secure, no longer under threat of foreclosure thanks to money I'd earned writing code and solving problems for companies that actually valued my expertise. Patricia greeted us at the door wearing her best hostess smile and a string of pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Emma, darling, you look lovely. The children are already here and so excited to spend time with you."
Not excited to spend Thanksgiving with family or excited to see their Aunt Emma, just excited to spend time with me, as if I were hired entertainment rather than a family member. "Where would you like me to put the casserole?" I asked, holding up my contribution to the meal. "Oh, just leave it in the kitchen. Maria will handle getting everything to the table." Maria was the housekeeper who Patricia employed for special occasions, another expense the family somehow maintained, despite their supposed financial constraints. The house was already full of relatives and family friends, the same crowd who'd celebrated the mortgage payoff a month earlier. I moved through the rooms making polite conversation, accepting compliments on my casserole from people who'd barely acknowledged my existence at previous gatherings. The irony wasn't lost on me that suddenly everyone seemed friendlier, more inclusive, as if the family's improved financial situation had somehow elevated my status by association. Caroline approached me while I was helping Maria arrange appetizers, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Emma, I wanted to thank you for being so good with the kids today. Tyler especially has been asking about you. He says you're the only adult who actually listens to him." This might have been touching, if it weren't also an implicit acknowledgement that I was being valued primarily for my childcare services rather than my role as a family member. "I enjoy spending time with them," I replied honestly. Tyler was David's 6-year-old nephew, a bright child who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Unlike the adults in his family, he treated me like a real person. "Patricia mentioned you'll be supervising the children's table again," Caroline continued. "I hope you don't mind. It's just that with all the adult conversation about business and family matters..." She trailed off, perhaps realizing how insulting her implication was. Adult conversation about business and family matters that apparently I wasn't sophisticated enough to follow or contribute to, despite the fact that I'd single-handedly solved their most pressing family matter. "Of course," I said, with my practiced smile, happy to help. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself following a familiar pattern, helping in the kitchen while the men watched football, entertaining children while the women discussed charity events, being useful but not essential, present but not fully included. The only difference was the frequent references to their good fortune, their mysterious benefactor, their relief at keeping the family home. "Robert thinks it might be that tech mogul from Medina," I heard Patricia telling her sister during a brief lull in my child supervision duties. "You know, the one who's been making all those anonymous donations around Seattle? He probably heard about our foundation work and wanted to help preserve a piece of local history." A tech mogul. Of course they would assume their savior was male, probably white, certainly someone from their social circle, rather than the Asian American woman sitting 15 feet away with their grandson. Dinner was announced at 4 o'clock, and the familiar dance began. The adults moved toward the formal dining room with its mahogany table and bone china. I was gently but firmly directed toward the breakfast nook, where a card table had been set up with paper plates and plastic cups. "Emma, you don't mind, do you?" Patricia asked with false sweetness. "We're just so crowded this year, and the children specifically requested you.
They say Thanksgiving isn't the same without Aunt Emma at their table. Aunt Emma, not cousin Emma or family member Emma, but the diminutive title that reinforced my position as a beloved outsider, someone related to them only through marriage and tolerated only because of my usefulness. I looked at the children's table. Tyler and his 8-year-old sister Madison, David's teenage nephew Connor, who was clearly mortified to be relegated to the kids section, Caroline's 4-year-old twins who were already fighting over crayons, and 2 children belonging to family friends who'd been invited to fill out the adult table numbers. Then I looked at the adult table, where my husband sat beside his mother, my empty chair nowhere to be seen, because there had never been a place intended for me among the grown-ups discussing grown-up things. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly across both rooms, I think there might be more space at the adult table than you realize. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry, dear. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment when I stopped accepting treatment I didn't deserve, when I stopped pretending that quiet endurance was the same as family harmony. Before we say grace, I announced, my voice projecting across both rooms in the sudden silence, I have something to share with the family. David's face went pale. He knew something was coming even if he couldn't guess what. I opened the envelope and pulled out the deed, holding it up so everyone could see the official-looking document. I want to thank everyone for their gratitude over the past month. It's been interesting to hear all your theories about who saved this house from foreclosure. The silence deepened. Several people were still holding their wine glasses halfway to their lips, frozen in the moment before understanding hint. The truth is, I continued, moving to stand between the 2 tables so everyone could hear me clearly, your mysterious benefactor isn't mysterious at all. I paid off your mortgage. All $847,000 of it came from my savings accounts and investment portfolio. Patricia's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the house. Robert stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. Caroline gasped audibly. David looked like he might vomit. That's impossible, Patricia stammered. You don't have that kind of money. I smiled, feeling genuine amusement for the first time in months. Actually, I do. Turns out those computer numbers you don't understand have been quite lucrative for me. Financial software development pays very well, especially when you're good at it. Uncle Richard found his voice first. But why didn't you tell us? Why the secrecy? Because I wanted to see how you would handle it, I replied honestly. I wanted to know if David would share important family financial news with his wife. I wanted to see if you would include me in your celebration of good fortune. I wanted to find out if your gratitude would extend to treating me like an actual family member rather than convenient help. I gestured towards the children's table with its paper plates and plastic cups. Instead, I discover that the woman who saved your family legacy isn't even important enough to sit with adults at Thanksgiving dinner. The room erupted in overlapping voices, Robert demanding to know how this was possible, Patricia insisting there must be some mistake, Caroline asking David if he'd known, David himself sitting in stunned silence, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Emma, Patricia finally managed, her composure cracking completely. We had no idea. If we'd known... You'd have had what? I interrupted. Treated me with basic respect? Included me in family decisions? Stopped relegating me to children's tables and kitchen duty?
I pulled out copies of the financial documents, spreading them on the mahogany table like evidence in a trial. These show every transaction, every bank transfer, every penny that came from my accounts to save your house, the house where I've been systematically marginalized for 3 years, the house where I'm not considered worthy of adult conversation despite being the only adult who actually solved your adult problems. Tyler, bless his 6-year-old heart, chose that moment to speak up from the children's table. Does this mean Aunt Emma can sit with us now? She's way more fun than the grown-ups anyway. His innocent comment broke the tension momentarily, several people actually laughing despite the chaos. But Tyler's words also highlighted the absurdity of the situation, a child showing more insight and kindness than the adults who'd spent years treating me as an accessory to their family rather than a member of it. David finally found his voice. "Emma, we need to talk about this privately." "No," I said firmly. "We've had 3 years to talk privately. You've had a month to tell me about the mortgage payment privately. You've had countless opportunities to treat me like your wife and partner privately. This conversation happens here, now, in front of the family I apparently saved but was never truly part of." I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going back to the children's table because honestly, Tyler is right. They are more fun than the grown-ups. They're more honest, more accepting, and they don't pretend to be grateful while treating me like hired help. Patricia stepped forward, her social training finally kicking in. "Emma, please, there's been a misunderstanding. Of course you belong at the adult table. Your chair is right here." She gestured vaguely toward the dining room. "Where?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Show me which chair was intended for me before I revealed that I'm your mortgage holder." The silence stretched out uncomfortably, because of course there was no chair. There had never been a chair planned for me at the adult table. I had been assigned to child supervision from the moment I walked in the door, the same way I'd been assigned to it for 3 years. "We can make room," Robert offered weakly. "You can make room," I agreed, sitting down at the children's table and picking up a paper cup. "But I prefer the honest company tonight. Tyler, would you like to say grace for our table?" The 6-year-old beamed at being given this responsibility, bowing his head seriously. "Thank you for turkey and stuffing and Aunt Emma, who always listens to us and makes Thanksgiving fun." Behind us, I heard the adult table struggling to reorganize themselves, chairs scraping, place settings being hurriedly rearranged. David appeared at my shoulder, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Emma, this is ridiculous. Stop making a scene and come to the real table." I looked up at my husband, this man I'd loved enough to marry, to support financially, to rescue from his family's mistakes without asking for credit or gratitude. "This is the real table, David. This is where your family put me, and this is where I'm staying." "We can discuss the mortgage situation later," he said in a low voice, "but right now you're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" I kept my voice calm, aware that the children were listening, even if they didn't understand all the adult drama unfolding around them. "David, I paid $847,000 to save your family's house, and you've spent a month lying to me about it. Who exactly should be embarrassed here?" Caroline approached hesitantly, James trailing behind her. "Emma, we're grateful, truly, we just didn't know." "You didn't know because your brother chose not to tell me about your family's financial problems," I replied. "You didn't know because I've never been included in important family discussions. You didn't know because despite being married to a Morrison, I've never been treated like I actually belonged to this family." I gestured to the documents still spread across the dining room table. "But you know now. You know that the mortgage on this house is in my name. You know that without my money, you'd be homeless right now. You know that the woman you've been treating like a glorified babysitter is the reason you're able to have Thanksgiving dinner in your family home." Patricia appeared at the edge of the children's table area, wringing her hands. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely uncertain rather than supremely confident. "Emma, dear, I owe you an apology. We all do. If I'd known about your contribution, things would have been different." "Would they?" I asked. "Because I've been contributing to this family for 3 years. Not just money, but time, effort, care.
I've planned your charity events, entertained your children, supported your son's career, and tried to fit into your world. The only thing that changed today is that you found out about the money." I stood up, smoothing my silk blouse, and that tells me everything I need to know about what I'm actually worth to this family. The children at my table were watching this adult drama with wide eyes, Madison still clutching her turkey-shaped cookie. I realized they were probably confused and possibly scared by the tension filling the room. "You know what?" I said, my voice becoming lighter. "This is supposed to be Thanksgiving. Tyler, Madison, Connor, what are you most thankful for this year?" Tyler raised his hand eagerly. "I'm thankful for video games and Aunt Emma teaching me about computers." Madison giggled. "I'm thankful for my new puppy and that Aunt Emma always remembers my birthday." Even teenage Connor, despite his embarrassment at being stuck at the kids' table, managed a small smile. "I'm thankful that someone finally told the grown-ups they were being mean." Out of the mouths of babes, Connor had summarized the entire situation with more clarity than any of the adults had managed. Behind us, I could hear the adult table finally beginning their meal, conversations stilted and uncomfortable. Robert was trying to make normal Thanksgiving small talk, but every attempt fell flat. Patricia kept glancing toward our table as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Aunt Emma," Tyler said, cutting into his turkey with serious concentration, "are you going to live in our house now, since you paid for it?" His innocent question carried across the room, and I heard several sharp intakes of breath from the adult table. It was a fair question from a 6-year-old's perspective, but it highlighted the legal reality that none of the adults wanted to face. "No, sweetie," I replied gently. "I'm going to let your grandparents keep living here, just like always. But it's your house now." "Technically, yes." Tyler considered this with the seriousness that only children can bring to complex situations. "So, if it's your house, you should get to sit wherever you want for dinner." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "And I want to sit here with you, because you're the best company in the house." David appeared beside our table again, this time carrying a plate of food from the adult spread. "Emma, please, let me make this right." I looked at the plate he was offering. Fine china instead of paper, real silverware, portions from the good serving dishes, an offering, an acknowledgement, an attempt at appeasement. "How exactly are you going to make this right, David?" I asked. "Are you going to start including me in family financial discussions? Are you going to stand up to your mother when she assigns me to kitchen duty? Are you going to treat me like an equal partner in our marriage instead of a convenient accessory?" He set the plate down on our card table, the expensive china looking absurd next to the children's plastic cups and construction paper placemats. "We'll talk about all of that after dinner, privately." "We've talked privately before," I reminded him. "Every time I've brought up feeling excluded from your family, you've told me I'm being too sensitive. Every time I've mentioned wanting to be included in important decisions, you've brushed me off. What makes you think this conversation will be different?" "Because everything's different now," he said, his voice dropping so the children couldn't hear clearly. "Because I know what you did for us." There it was, the truth laid bare. Things weren't different because he'd realized he'd been treating me poorly. Things were different because I had something he needed: the house, the financial stability, and the legal power that came with holding the mortgage on the family estate. "You're right," I said, cutting into my turkey with Tyler's plastic knife. "Everything is different now, but not in the way you think." I turned my attention back to the children, asking Madison about her puppy and helping the twins negotiate a trade of their desserts. Around us, the adult table struggled through their meal, every conversation topic seeming to lead back to the elephant in the room, their financial dependence on the woman they'd relegated to child supervision. As dinner wound down, the traditional post-meal activities began. The men retreated to the living room for football and brandy. The women started clearing dishes and planning leftover distribution. And I was expected to entertain the children while the adults digested both their food and the new reality of their situation. But this time, things proceeded differently. Patricia approached me as I was helping Tyler color a turkey picture, her face showing a combination of determination and uncertainty I'd never seen before. "Emma, dear, why don't you let me handle the children for a while? Perhaps you'd like to join the other women in the kitchen? Susan was just saying how much she'd love to hear about your work." It was an olive branch, an invitation to join the adult activities from which I'd been excluded. But it felt hollow, motivated by financial necessity rather than genuine respect or inclusion. "Thank you," I said, politely, "but I'm enjoying the coloring. Tyler's teaching me about different turkey breeds. Did you know there are heritage varieties that can live up to 10 years? Patricia's smile became strained. She wasn't used to having her invitations declined, especially by someone she considered subordinate in the family hierarchy. "Well, if you change your mind," she said, trailing off uncertainly. "I'll let you know," I replied, picking up a brown crayon. Throughout the afternoon, similar scenarios played out. Caroline invited me to join the women's discussion of upcoming charity events. Robert suggested I might want to hear his analysis of the stock market. David repeatedly tried to pull me aside for private conversations.
Each time, I politely declined staying with the children who seemed perfectly happy to have my undivided attention. Tyler taught me a card game. Madison showed me how to bake paper snowflakes. Even Connor, initially sulky about being stuck at the kids' table, began to relax and actually participate in conversations when he realized I was treating him like a person rather than a problem to be managed. As evening approached and families began preparing to leave, the reality of the situation settled over the Morrison household like a heavy blanket. I owned their house. They needed my goodwill to maintain their lifestyle and social position. And I had made it clear that their previous treatment of me was no longer acceptable. David cornered me in the hallway as I was helping Tyler gather his crayons and drawings. The rest of the family was in various stages of departure preparation, coats being retrieved, leftover containers being filled, the awkward dance of people who weren't quite sure how to end an evening that had exploded all their assumptions. "We need to talk," David said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Now." I looked down at Tyler, who was carefully folding his turkey drawing to take home. "Give me just a minute to finish helping Tyler, and then we can talk." "This can't wait," David insisted, his hand gripping my elbow with more force than necessary. Tyler looked up at us with the uncanny perception that children sometimes display. "Are you guys fighting about the house thing?" David's face flushed. Even a 6-year-old had grasped the situation more clearly than the adults had been willing to acknowledge all evening. "It's complicated, buddy," I said gently, ruffling Tyler's hair. "But everything's going to be okay." "My mom and dad fight about money sometimes too," Tyler said matter-of-factly, "but they always work it out." The innocent comment hit David like a physical blow. Here was his nephew casually acknowledging that family financial discussions were normal, healthy parts of marriage. Exactly the kind of conversations David had been hiding from me for months. "Tyler, why don't you go find your mom?" David said, his voice strained. "Tell her you're ready to go." As Tyler scampered off with his artwork, David turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but something desperate and cornered. "What the hell was that in there?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "You humiliated my entire family." "I told the truth," I replied calmly. "Which one of us should be humiliated by the truth, David? You could have handled this privately. You didn't need to make a scene in front of everyone." I studied my husband's face.
noting the way his jaw was clenched, the way he kept glancing toward the living room where his family was pretending to have normal post-dinner conversations while actually straining to overhear our discussion. Privately, I repeated. Like how you privately told me about the foreclosure notice? Like how you privately included me in family financial decisions? Like how you privately defended me when your mother assigned me to children's table duty for the 3rd year running? That's different. How? David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our early dating days when he was stressed about work. But this wasn't work stress. This was the stress of a man whose carefully constructed life had just been turned upside down by his wife's refusal to remain invisible. "You don't understand how my family works," he said finally. "There are protocols, hierarchies. You can't just blow everything up because you're feeling excluded."
Protocols, I said slowly. Is that what you call lying to your wife about major financial crises? Is that what you call letting your mother treat me like hired help while I'm literally paying your family's bills? You weren't paying our bills then. You chose to pay off the mortgage without telling anyone. The distinction was so absurd I almost laughed. David, we're married. Your family's financial crisis was affecting our financial future. That mortgage was in both our names as guarantors. Your parents' bankruptcy would have destroyed your career at the family firm. How exactly was this not my problem to solve? Because it wasn't your responsibility. But it was my money that solved it. David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because what could he say? That I should have let their family lose their home? That I should have watched their career crumble along with the family business? That I should have pretended not to notice our own financial situation deteriorating while he hid the truth from me? "The point is," he said finally, "you could have found a better way to handle tonight." Could I? I leaned against the hallway wall, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of 3 years of trying to fit into a family that had never intended to make room for me. "David, I have spent 3 years handling your family's treatment of me with grace and patience. I've smiled through countless dinner parties where I was ignored. I've accepted being assigned to kitchen duty and childcare while the adults discussed important matters. I've pretended not to notice when your mother introduces me as David's wife rather than by my name. She does use your name. When? When has your mother ever introduced me as Emma Chen Morrison, successful software engineer, and David's equal partner? When has she ever mentioned my career achievements or included me in business discussions where my expertise might actually be valuable?" David's silence stretched out uncomfortably, because we both knew the answer was never. "Tonight," I continued, "I discovered that even saving your family from financial ruin wouldn't earn me a seat at the adult table. That should tell you everything you need to know about what your family really thinks of me." "They're grateful," David protested weakly. "They're grateful to a mysterious benefactor they assumed was a wealthy man from their social circle. They had no idea the benefactor was the woman they'd been treating like a convenient babysitter." From the living room, we could hear Patricia's voice rising in what she probably thought was a whisper, but carried clearly down the hallway. I simply don't understand why she felt the need to make such a production of it. Surely there were more gracious ways to reveal her contribution. David winced, knowing I'd heard his mother's comment. Even now, in the aftermath of learning I'd saved their home, Patricia was more concerned with my breach of social protocol than with examining her own behavior. "She's just processing," David said lamely. "This is a lot for everyone to take in." "Is it?" I asked, because it seems to me that the hard part should have been losing the family home. Finding out it was saved should be the easy part. Unless, of course, you're more upset about who saved it than you are grateful that it was saved at all. Connor appeared at the end of the hallway, looking uncomfortable. My parents are ready to leave and they want to say goodbye." We walked back toward the living room, where the remaining family members were gathered in an awkward cluster. Caroline and James stood near the door with their coats on, Tyler and Madison flanking them like small sentries. Robert was pouring himself another scotch, despite the early hour. Patricia sat rigidly in her chair, her composure restored but her eyes still showing traces of the shock she'd experienced earlier. "Emma?"
Caroline said as we approached. "I wanted to thank you again. What you did, it means everything to our family." "I'm just glad I could help," I replied, meaning it despite everything else that had happened. "The children had such a wonderful time with you today," James added. "Tyler hasn't stopped talking about the card game you taught him." It was a small kindness, acknowledging that my contribution to the day had been more than financial, but it also highlighted the ongoing problem. Even now, even after the revelations of the evening, my value to the family was still being measured primarily in terms of my usefulness rather than my inherent worth as a family member. Tyler bounced over to me, his energy undimmed by the adult drama swirling around him. "Aunt Emma, will you come to my birthday party next month? I want to show you my new computer game." "Of course," I said, crouching down to his level. I wouldn't miss it. "Will you sit at the grown-up table then?" he asked with 6-year-old directness. The question silenced the room. Tyler had managed to articulate what all the adults were dancing around, whether tonight's revelations would actually change anything about how I was treated going forward, or whether everyone would simply pretend it had never happened once the shock wore off. "We'll see," I said, diplomatically, ruffling his hair. "I think Aunt Emma should always sit at the grown-up table," Tyler declared, with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned that fairness wasn't guaranteed. "She's the smartest grown-up I know." Caroline and James exchanged glances, probably wondering how much of tonight's drama their children had understood. Madison tugged on her mother's coat, ready to go home and process the day's events in whatever way 4-year-olds process adult complications. After they left, the house felt different. Quieter, but also more tense. David's uncle and aunt had departed earlier, citing long drives home. The catering staff had finished cleaning and gone. It was just the core Morrison family now: Robert, Patricia, David, and me. And the elephant in the room that was my legal ownership of their house. "Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this properly," Robert said, gesturing toward the living room seating area. "There are obviously some things we need to work through." Patricia's face went through several expressions before settling on strained politeness. "Yes, of course. Emma dear, would you like some coffee? Or perhaps some wine?" It was such a normal hostess gesture that it almost seemed surreal after everything that had happened. But I recognized it for what it was: Patricia's attempt to regain some sense of control over the situation by returning to familiar social scripts. "Coffee would be nice," I said, settling into one of the expensive armchairs that I now technically owned. As Patricia busied herself with the coffee service, a ritual she normally would have delegated to me, Robert cleared his throat and attempted to take charge of the conversation. "Emma, first I want to say how grateful we are for what you have done. The family owes you a debt that goes beyond money." I waited for him to continue, sensing there was a but coming. "But I think we need to discuss how to handle this situation going forward. The legal implications, the family dynamics, the practical considerations." "What legal implications?" I asked, though I already knew what he was getting at. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, technically, you hold the mortgage on the house now. That puts you in a position of significant leverage over the family." "Leverage," I repeated. "Is that how you see this? As me trying to gain leverage over your family?" "That's not what he meant," Patricia said quickly, returning with the coffee service. "We're just trying to understand the new arrangement." I accepted a cup of coffee in one of Patricia's best china cups, noting the irony that I was finally being served from the good dishes, now that I legally owned them. "The arrangement is simple," I said. I paid off your mortgage to prevent foreclosure. The bank transferred the deed to me as the new mortgage holder. You continue living in your family home, and I continue being married to your son." "But what are the terms?" Robert pressed. "Do you expect us to pay you back? Is there interest? What happens if—" He trailed off, unable to finish the question that was obviously on all their minds. What happens if David and I divorce? "I haven't thought about terms," I said honestly. "I paid off the mortgage as a gift to David's family. I didn't expect anything in return except basic respect and inclusion in family decisions that affect me." "But now you own our house," Patricia said, her voice thin with barely controlled emotion. "Our family home for 5 generations is in your name." "Yes," I agreed, "it is." The simple acknowledgement hung in the air like a challenge. Because what could they say? That they wanted me to sign the house back over to them without any guarantee that they'd treat me differently? That they expected me to give up the one thing that had finally gotten their attention? "We could work out some kind of arrangement," David suggested. "Maybe a family trust or a legal structure that protects everyone's interests." "Everyone's interests," I said slowly. "David, what exactly do you think my interests are in this situation?" He looked genuinely confused by the question, which told me everything I needed to know about how little he'd considered my perspective throughout our marriage. "I assume you want the family to stay together," he said finally. "You want harmony and good relationships." "I want to be treated like a family member instead of like hired help who occasionally receives a paycheck. I want to be included in important decisions. I want my husband to tell me when our financial future is at risk instead of hiding it from me for months. I want to sit at the adult table at family dinners without having to buy my way in." Patricia set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Emma, dear, I think you're being unfair. We've always treated you as part of the family." "Have you?" I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album I'd been unconsciously maintaining for 3 years. "Let me show you how I've been treated as part of the family." I scrolled to a picture from David's birthday party the previous year. Here's the seating arrangement for David's birthday dinner. Notice where I'm sitting? The photo clearly showed me at a separate, smaller table with Caroline's children, while all the adults sat together at the main table. And here's Christmas last year. Another photo, same pattern. And Easter, another photo. And your anniversary party, Patricia.
With each photo, the pattern became undeniable. In every family gathering, I was positioned with the children or relegated to service roles while the actual family members participated in adult conversations and decision-making. "And here," I said, scrolling to a particularly telling photo, "is the planning meeting for the Foundation's annual gala. Notice who's not in this picture despite having reorganized your entire database and financial management system?" The photo showed Robert, Patricia, David, and Caroline seated around the dining room table with documents spread out before them. I wasn't in the frame because I'd been in the kitchen preparing refreshments for their meeting about an event I'd helped plan but wasn't consulted about. "These photos span 3 years," I continued. 3 years of being systematically excluded from family decisions, family conversations, and family respect. The only thing that changed today was that you found out I have money, and suddenly everyone wants to discuss my interests and work out arrangements." David reached for my phone, probably wanting to see the photos more clearly, but I pulled it back. These weren't just random snapshots, they were documentation of a pattern of behavior so consistent it couldn't be dismissed as accidental or misunderstood. "I never realized," Patricia said faintly, though whether she was admitting to the pattern or claiming ignorance was unclear. "You never realized?" I repeated. "Because you never had to think about my comfort or inclusion. I was useful for certain tasks, organizing events, watching children, filling out dinner party numbers when you needed an even count. But I was never considered an equal participant in family life."
Robert drained his scotch and set the glass down heavily. So, what do you want from us now? An apology? A guarantee of better treatment? What would it take for you to consider our family relationship repaired? The way he phrased it, as if our relationship were a damaged business contract that could be fixed with the right terms, told me everything about how he viewed my role in the family hierarchy. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not sure it can be repaired. Today was the first time in 3 years that anyone in this family has listened to me speak for more than 30 seconds without interrupting or redirecting the conversation to someone else. That's not true, David protested. Isn't it? David, when was the last time you asked me about my work? Not just how was your day in passing, but actually asked me about projects I'm working on, problems I'm solving, achievements I'm proud of. David's silence was answer enough. When was the last time any of you asked my opinion about anything more significant than what dessert to serve at a dinner party? More silence. When was the last time any of you treated me like someone whose thoughts and insights might be valuable, rather than someone whose primary function is to be helpful and accommodating? Patricia cleared her throat delicately. Emma, I think you may be oversensitizing certain social dynamics. Families have natural hierarchies and roles. It takes time for newer members to find their place. 3 years, I said. How much time does it take, Patricia? Because I've been married to your son for 3 years, and my place in your family hierarchy seems to be permanently fixed somewhere between the hired help and the furniture. Now you're being dramatic, she said, her composure slipping back into her familiar patronizing tone. Am I? Let me ask you this. If your mysterious benefactor had turned out to be a wealthy businessman from your social circle, would you have seated him at the children's table tonight? Patricia's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. If Robert's business partner had anonymously paid off your mortgage, would you have assigned him to kitchen duty and childcare? That's different, she said weakly. How? Because they would be guests, not family. Exactly, I said. Guests get treated with respect and consideration. Family members apparently get assigned to whatever role is most convenient for everyone else. The conversation was interrupted by David's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Caroline, he said, answering the call. Hi, What? Slow down. When did this happen? His face went pale as he listened, and I felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. After everything that had happened today, what new crisis could Caroline be calling about? Okay, we'll be right there, David said, ending the call. He turned to us with a stricken expression. Tyler's in the emergency room. He was playing on his computer when he started having trouble breathing. Caroline thinks it might be an allergic reaction to something he ate at dinner. The room exploded into motion. Patricia grabbed her purse, Robert reached for his car keys, David stood up so quickly he knocked over his coffee cup, and I found myself automatically shifting into crisis mode, the same way I'd handled every family emergency for the past 3 years. Which hospital? I asked, already pulling up directions on my phone. Seattle Children's, David replied, heading for the door. Patricia, do you have Tyler's medical information? I called after her. Insurance cards, medication lists, emergency contacts? She paused, looking confused. Caroline has all that. No, she doesn't. She called you because she needs Tyler's medical history for the doctors. He's had reactions before, hasn't he? To strawberries and shellfish? Patricia stared at me in amazement. How did you know that? Because I pay attention to the children, I said, grabbing my coat. Because when Tyler told me about his allergies during one of our conversations, I remembered it. In the car ride to the hospital, I found myself automatically taking charge in the way I'd learned to do during any Morrison family crisis. I called ahead to the emergency room to let them know we were coming. I texted Caroline to ask about Tyler's symptoms and timeline. I coordinated with Robert and Patricia to make sure we had all necessary information and documentation. It was only when we were sitting in the hospital waiting room that I realized what had just happened. In the middle of the most significant family confrontation in my 3-year marriage, a child I cared about was in medical distress, and I had immediately set aside my own concerns to help manage the crisis. This was the pattern that had defined my role in the Morrison family from the beginning. I was the competent one, the problem solver, the person who handled logistics and emergencies while the actual family members dealt with emotions and dramatics. I was useful in crisis situations, but not valued as an equal participant in family life. Tyler turned out to be fine. The breathing difficulties were caused by anxiety rather than an allergic reaction. Apparently, the tension and arguments during dinner had affected him more than anyone realized. After a few hours of observation and some calming conversations with child life specialists, he was released with instructions to follow up with his pediatrician. Anxiety, Caroline said as we gathered in the hospital lobby afterward. The doctor said children Tyler's age are more sensitive to family stress than we realize. He thinks Tyler was picking up on the adult tension during dinner. Everyone looked uncomfortable with this diagnosis, probably because it suggested that the family drama had been more obvious and disruptive than they'd wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't think about how the children might be affected by the conversation." "You don't need to apologize," Caroline replied. "According to Tyler, you were the only adult who made him feel safe and included today. He told the doctor that Aunt Emma always listens to him and treats him like his thoughts matter." Out of the mouths of babes again. Tyler's perspective on family dynamics was clearer than any of the adults had been willing to acknowledge. As we prepared to leave the hospital, I realized something had shifted during the crisis. Not in any dramatic way, but in small gestures and interactions that suggested the evening's revelations had created cracks in the family's established patterns. Patricia had asked my opinion about Tyler's medical history and accepted my information without question. Robert had thanked me specifically for coordinating the hospital logistics. Caroline had sought my input about Tyler's emotional state rather than dismissing my observations. Even David had treated me more like a partner during the crisis, consulting with me about decisions and including me in family discussions about Tyler's care. It wasn't transformation. It was too small and too situational for that. But it was acknowledgement. For the first time in 3 years, the Morrison family had needed my expertise and competence in a way they couldn't ignore or minimize. "Emma," Patricia said as we reached our cars in the hospital parking garage, would you be willing to come to lunch tomorrow? Just the two of us. I think we need to have a conversation." I studied my mother-in-law's face, noting the uncertainty there. This was probably the first time Patricia Morrison had ever found herself in a position where she needed to ask rather than command, where she had to consider someone else's feelings rather than simply expecting compliance. "I'd be willing to listen," I said carefully. Good. I'll call you in the morning to arrange something." As David and I drove home in relative silence, I found myself thinking about Tyler's wisdom. Children, it seemed, had a much clearer understanding of respectful treatment than adults who had spent years perfecting the art of social manipulation. "Thank you," David said finally, as we pulled into our driveway, "for handling the hospital situation, for knowing about Tyler's medical history, for everything tonight." "Don't thank me for doing what any family member would do," I replied. "Thank me by figuring out how to treat me like a family member going forward." David turned off the car, but made no move to get out. We sat in our darkened garage, the silence stretching between us like a bridge that neither of us was quite ready to cross. "I know I've messed up," he said finally. "I know I've let my family treat you badly, and I know I've been part of the problem. But I don't know how to fix it." "Start by telling me the truth," I said, "about everything, about your family's finances, about the pressure you've been under, about why you felt like you couldn't include me in these decisions." "I was embarrassed," he admitted. "My family has this image, this reputation for financial success and stability. When everything started falling apart, I couldn't face admitting it to you. You're so competent, so successful in your own right. I was afraid you'd lose respect for me if you knew how badly my family had mismanaged everything.
It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months, and it helped me understand some of his behavior, even if it didn't excuse it. David, I said gently, I married you, not your family's financial portfolio. I didn't fall in love with your trust fund. I fell in love with you. But you're so much more successful than I am. Your career, your income, your ability to solve complex problems. Sometimes I feel like I bring nothing to our relationship except my family's social connections. And there it was, the insecurity that had been driving his behavior, his need to maintain his family's image and social position, even at the cost of honest communication with his wife. You bring yourself, I said. Or at least you did when we first met. The man I married was confident and kind and interesting. But somewhere along the way, you started caring more about what your family thought than about what your wife needed. We finally went inside, both of us exhausted by the day's emotional revelations. But as we got ready for bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not for immediate change or easy solutions, but for the possibility of honest conversation and genuine partnership. The next morning, Patricia called at exactly 10 o'clock, her voice carefully controlled and artificially bright. "Emma, dear, would you be free for lunch today? I was thinking that little French place on Madison that you mentioned liking." She'd remembered my preference for the bistro, a small detail that she'd never bothered to notice before. It was a tiny gesture, but it suggested she was making an effort to consider my comfort, rather than simply assuming I'd accommodate whatever she preferred. "I could meet you at 1 o'clock, I said. "Perfect. I'll make a reservation." The bistro was busy with the usual lunch crowd of business people and shoppers, but Patricia had somehow secured a quiet corner table that would allow for private conversation. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, but was understated enough to avoid drawing attention. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I'd listen," I replied. I meant it. We ordered our meals with the kind of polite small talk that had characterized most of our interactions over the past 3 years. But I could sense Patricia's nervousness, the way she kept adjusting her napkin and glancing around the restaurant as if looking for escape routes. "Emma," she began once the server had left, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." I waited, curious to see how she would frame her acknowledgement of 3 years of systematic marginalization. "I realize that that my behavior toward you hasn't always been as welcoming as it should have been. Family dynamics can be complex, and sometimes traditions and habits persist without anyone really examining whether they're appropriate." It was a carefully worded non-apology, the kind of statement that acknowledged problems without accepting responsibility for creating them. But it was more than Patricia had ever offered before, so I let her continue. "When David first brought you home, I'll admit I had some concerns. Not about you personally," she added quickly, "but about whether you understood how our family works, what would be expected of you as a Morrison wife." "Expected of me," I repeated. "What kinds of expectations did you have, Patricia?" She looked uncomfortable with the direct question. "Well, there are certain roles that family members traditionally fill. Social obligations, charitable commitments, ways of maintaining family reputation and connections." "And you thought I didn't understand these roles? I thought you might need guidance in adapting to them. Your background is so different from ours, and some of the social nuances might not have been obvious to you." I set down my water glass carefully. "Patricia, I've organized your charity events, managed your foundation's database, coordinated your social calendar, and supervised your grandchildren at family gatherings.
Which social nuances did you think I was missing?" "That's not what I meant," she said, flustered. "You've been wonderfully helpful, but being helpful isn't the same as being integrated into family decision-making and leadership roles." "Why not?" The simple question seemed to catch her off guard. Because those roles require a certain level of trust and shared understanding. They require knowing family history and values and priorities. How was I supposed to learn family history and values if I was never included in conversations where they were discussed? Patricia's carefully constructed explanation was falling apart under the weight of basic logic, because the truth was that she'd never intended for me to be integrated into family leadership. She'd assigned me supporting roles and expected me to be content with them indefinitely. "I suppose," she said finally, "I assumed you were happy with your level of involvement. You never complained." "I never complained because David asked me not to. He said you were set in your ways, and it would be easier for everyone if I just went along with family traditions." This revelation clearly surprised Patricia. "David said that?" "Multiple times. Whenever I mentioned feeling excluded from family decisions or relegated to childcare duties, he told me I was being too sensitive and should try to keep the peace." Patricia's expression shifted, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely troubled rather than just socially uncomfortable. "I see," she said quietly. "I didn't realize David was... I thought he was supporting you and finding your place in the family." "He was supporting the family's preference for keeping me in a subordinate role," I corrected. "There's a difference." Our food arrived, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation, but as we began eating, Patricia returned to the difficult territory we'd been exploring. "Emma, what you did yesterday, paying off the mortgage, it changes things, obviously, but I'm not sure any of us know how to handle this new dynamic." "What new dynamic?" I asked. "The dynamic where I'm treated like an adult family member instead of convenient help? The dynamic where my opinions matter because I have financial leverage? Or the dynamic where you finally have to acknowledge that I'm not going anywhere?" Patricia winced at my bluntness. "All of those, I suppose, but also the practical considerations. You own our house now. That puts you in a position of tremendous power over the family, and frankly, it makes me nervous." "It makes you nervous that I have power, or that I demonstrated I'm willing to use it?" "Both," she admitted with surprising honesty. "I've spent my entire adult life as the matriarch of the Morrison family. I'm used to being the one who makes decisions about family matters, who sets social expectations, who determines how relationships within the family should function. Yesterday, you made it clear that those days might be over." Finally, we were getting to the real issue. This wasn't about hurt feelings or social protocols. This was about power and control, about Patricia's fear that her position as family authority figure was being challenged by someone she'd never considered an equal.
"Patricia," I said carefully, "I don't want to be the matriarch of your family. I just want to be a respected member of it." "But you have the mortgage," she said. "You have legal control over our family home. How do we maintain normal family relationships when the balance of power has shifted so dramatically?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about since the previous evening, because she was right. Holding the deed to their house did give me unprecedented leverage over the Morrison family dynamics. "We figure out how to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial dependence," I said. "The mortgage was never supposed to be leverage. It was supposed to be a gift. But if that's the only thing that gets your attention, then we'll work with that reality." "What do you mean?" I took a breath, knowing that what I was about to propose would either fix our family relationships or destroy them completely. "I mean that I'm keeping the house," I said. "Not as a weapon or a threat, but as insurance that I'll never again be treated as a disposable family member.
You can continue living there. Robert can continue hosting business dinners there. You can continue using it for charity events. But it belongs to me now, and that means I get treated like someone who belongs in the family, too. Patricia's face went through several emotions before settling on resigned understanding. You're not going to sign it back over to us. No, I confirmed. I'm not. Not because I want to control your family, but because I want to prevent you from going back to treating me like I don't matter once the shock of yesterday wears off. And if we can't adjust to that new reality, I met her eyes directly. Then you'll have to decide what matters more, your pride or your family home. We finished lunch in relative quiet, both of us processing the new boundaries that had been established. As we prepared to leave, Patricia made one final attempt to negotiate. What if we set up some kind of formal arrangement, legal documents that outline everyone's rights and responsibilities, something that protects both your interests and ours? I'm open to that, I said, but any legal arrangement would need to include provisions about my role in family decisions and social functions. I won't sign anything that preserves your authority to exclude me from adult conversations and assign me to children's table duty. Patricia's laugh was short and bitter. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Easy for whom? I asked. Patricia, making this easy for you is what got us into the situation in the first place. I spent 3 years making things easy for your family by accepting treatment I didn't deserve. Those days are over. As I drove home from lunch, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. I had been clear about my boundaries and expectations, but I had no idea whether the Morrison family would be able to adjust to treating me as an equal rather than a subordinate. David was waiting for me when I got home, sitting at our kitchen table with documents spread out in front of him. "How did lunch go?" he asked. "Your mother is processing the new reality," I said. "How are you processing it?" He gestured to the papers on the table. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about telling you the truth about everything. So I brought home all the financial documents from the family business. I want to show you exactly how bad things got, and I want your help figuring out how to make sure they don't get that bad again." I sat down across from him, studying the spreadsheets and statements he'd laid out. The numbers were worse than I'd imagined. The Morrison Investment Group wasn't just struggling, it was barely solvent. Without the mortgage payment I'd made, the family would have lost not just their home, but their business and most of their remaining assets within 6 months. "David," I said slowly, "these numbers suggest your family has been living beyond their means for years. The mortgage was just the beginning of their problems." "I know," he said miserably, "and I've been complicit in hiding it, not just from you, but from Caroline and some of the extended family members. My father kept insisting we could turn things around, that it was just a temporary rough patch." I studied the documents more carefully, my financial software background allowing me to see patterns and problems that might not be obvious to someone without my training. "You're going to need to restructure everything," I said finally. "The business model, the family's personal spending, the investment strategies. This isn't a temporary problem that can be solved with better cash flow management. This is a fundamental problem with how your family thinks about money and status." David nodded grimly. "I was afraid you'd say that. But I need your help, Emma. Not just financially, but strategically. You understand complex systems in ways that none of us do." It was the first time in our marriage that he'd acknowledged my professional expertise as something valuable to our family, rather than just something that happened to generate income. "I'm willing to help," I said, "but there are conditions." "What conditions?" I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "First, complete financial transparency. No more hiding problems or excluding me from discussions about family financial matters. Second, I want a formal role in the family business restructuring. not as a silent partner, but as an equal participant in decision-making. David watched me write, his expression serious. Third, I continued, any family member who wants to continue living in the house I now own needs to contribute fairly to maintenance, utilities, and property taxes. No more free rides based on family status. That's reasonable, David said quietly. Fourth, and this is non-negotiable, I want respect and inclusion in all family social functions. No more children's table assignments, no more kitchen duty while the adults discuss important matters, no more introducing me as David's wife instead of by my own name and accomplishments. I set down the pen and looked at my husband. Can you live with those conditions? Can your family? David studied the list I'd written, understanding that this was about much more than money or business arrangements. This was about whether the Morrison family could evolve beyond their traditional hierarchies and actually embrace me as an equal member. It won't be easy, he said finally. My parents, especially my mother, are going to struggle with giving up control. Then they'll struggle, I replied. But those are my terms for rebuilding our family relationships and helping save the family business. Take it or leave it. David reached across the table and took my hand. I choose to take it. And Emma, I'm sorry it took a financial crisis and you buying our family home to make me realize how badly I failed you as a husband. Don't apologize, I said. Just do better going forward. 3 months later, Tyler's birthday party became the first real test of whether the Morrison family could adapt to their new reality. For the first time in my marriage, I was seated at the main table with the other adults. For the first time, Patricia introduced me as Emma Chen Morrison, our family's financial strategist and Tyler's favorite aunt. For the first time, I was consulted about family decisions and treated as someone whose opinions mattered. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still adjustments that everyone was learning to make. But when Tyler asked me to help him with his new computer game, I didn't have to excuse myself from adult conversation because I was finally, genuinely included in it. As I watched Tyler blow out his candles, I realized that saving the Morrison family home had done more than prevent a foreclosure. It had forced all of us to examine what it really meant to be family, and what we owed each other beyond obligations and traditions. The house still stood on its hill overlooking the Sound, still hosted family dinners and charity events. But now it truly felt like home. Not just for the Morrisons, who had always belonged there, but for the woman who had finally bought her way to the family table and found her voice strong enough to claim her rightful place at it.